Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee meeting for July 2nd, 2024. It's now 1:30 p.m. This meeting will now come to order. Madam Clerk, take the roll, please.
McBride. Present. Livingston.
Here.
Weaver. Walker.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, it's my understanding that Councilman Weaver is away at the moment, out of town, but he will make an effort to attend today's meeting virtually. Next item on the agenda is item 2, approval of the minutes. This is from the June 18th, 2024 meeting. Entertain a motion.
Approval.
It's been moved to properly second. Any discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk?
McBride.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, next item on the agenda is item 3, adoption of the agenda. Any changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda? All right,
Adoption of the agenda.
second. Second. Properly second. Any discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk?
McBride.
Yes.
Livingston. Walker.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, also I'd like to acknowledge some of our colleagues who are not on the committee but are present this afternoon for this meeting. I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Allison Terracio, also Councilwoman Shakise Newton, as well as Councilman Jason Bradham. Thank you all for participating this afternoon, well, being present. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone who is attending virtually? Any of our colleagues attending virtually?
Not at this moment.
All right. All right, next item on the agenda is item 4, items for discussion and/or action. Item 4A, final review of penny principles. Mr. Jones, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and other members of council. And while we're pulling up the presentation, I just kind of wanted to frame a little bit where we are. At our work session that was held on June 25th, there was a robust conversation about certain elements of the principles and other items that would impact the ordinance. And I think it was decided at that meeting that those items needed to come back to this committee in order to make a recommendation one way or another to County Council for its planned meeting on July 16th. And so we're going to try to focus today on the items that were discussed. We'll also give a little bit of a review of how we've gotten here. And then, Mr. Chair, we can take questions at any time or take questions at the end, whatever's most convenient for the committee. I see the presentation is up. That's perfect. If we can go just to the second page of the presentation, which is just our agenda. We are going to step through our roadmap. I think that's critical that we start and end all of our discussions about the penny with a roadmap that has been adopted by council. It's been a great guiding document for all of us. We're going to discuss revised highlights of the principles document. I say revised because we've incorporated some changes that came from our conversations on June 25th. We're going to review quickly the categorized needs list. We're going to review the penny allocations that were also discussed on June 25th. And then finally, we'll take a look at our next steps. So if we could go to the third page of the presentation. This is our roadmap, and you'll see that there are now 16 gray boxes on the roadmap, which means we've had 16 public meetings at which the penny, its principles, the needs that are being addressed, the allocation of the penny, and all things that are attendant to those topics have been discussed. And of course, today is the 17th public meeting so far in this process. We're on our way to a public hearing on July 9th. If council wishes to entertain an ordinance, third reading of the penny ordinance on July 16th. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just by way of process, I want to just remind everyone sort of how we've gotten here. You may recall that we began with a long series of meetings, not only with this committee, but also with the TPAC. It made recommendations directly to this committee, which were entertained on June 18th. Those recommendations were among the items discussed on June 25th. And as we find ourselves here today, we're really in the last handoff, if you will, in the relay, where the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee is now looking to make final recommendations to County Council for its meeting on July 16th. If we can go to the next slide, please. I just want to just take a few minutes just to highlight again some of the items that are in the principles. This is by no means intended to be a full read of the principles. The clerk's office was, I think, very prescient in asking me to have a version, the most recent version of the principles sent out to you all in advance of this meeting, so you all have got the latest, greatest version. But just by way of some of the highlights, we start with general conditions. These are conditions that would apply to all aspects of the new penny as it's managed by the Transportation Department. Of course, they have to be, penny projects have to be undertaken, or transportation needs have to be addressed in accordance with existing county ordinances and policies. The way a transportation need is addressed has to take care of a strategic objective of the county. Revenue Ruling 22-2 are the guidelines that many of you are already aware of. They've been sort of codified, and now the guidelines that were initially applied to Richland County now apply to all transportation pennies in South Carolina. Finally, there was a lot of conversation at our last meeting regarding the $20 million expenditure in each district. We distilled those conversations into this change, which says that the proceeds of the new penny shall be expended equitably across the county, and each county council district shall receive a minimum of $20 million in funding from the new penny for projects in the community investment or county advancement categories. Maybe I'll pause there and make sure that addresses the conversations that we had.
Questions from the body so far? Continue on, Mr. Jones.
Okay. If we go to the next slide, these are items that you have seen before. There are a couple of new additions. Just wanted to note and repeat for purposes of this meeting that the 2012 needs, meaning those 2012 projects that are viable and unfunded, that they are being prioritized in this penny, and they will be addressed first. That's one of the critical elements of the principles. The second box talks about isolated communities or communities that rely on a particular road for a primary means of access. We have left the sole means of ingress and egress as a factor, but we've also added the primary access factor as a result of the conversations that were had at the June 25th work session. The final box shows that the community investment projects are the category of projects where the unfunded 2012 projects will be addressed. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yep, yes, sir.
Recognize Mr. Livingston.
Back to the question I raised the last time, when you talk about the unfunded 2012 project, each specific project is going to be listed. Because I don't want us to get to the point where later on we're arguing about what was a 2012 project that was approved and not funded.
So, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, you recognize Mr. Jones.
So, as we understand it right now, Mr. Livingston, they are specifically listed. The 2012 projects are specifically listed on the needs list. They have been specifically included in the categorized needs list. So it's our understanding that that list, which bears the input both of Stantec, which has been a great partner in this process, as well as Mr. Maloney, we understand that that is the list, subject to anyone else's input. Okay. If we can go to the next slide, please. I just want to highlight for the committee, and this is by way of review, that we do have an emerging needs concept in our principles, and this is designed to make sure that our penny program that is prayerfully adopted in November of 24 will be one that is dynamic, that is allowed to change and be modified in accordance with the needs of the community. And so the mechanism by which that would happen is very similar to the mechanism that we've all undertaken here over the last several months, which would include involvement from the Transportation Penny Advisory Committee, as well as this committee, and ultimately approval by council. Any emerging needs would go through the same scoring and be subject to the same ordinances and other categorization and priority as current needs. And so no difference there. And just wanted to highlight that for the committee. If I can go to the next slide, please. The management of the new penny, this section has always been in the principles. In the front of the document, we have said very clearly that the Transportation Department is going to be charged with the management of the new penny. We simply added that here as well, just to make sure that it's parallel and consistent, and there's no question as to how the program is going to be managed. Of course, it's always managed under the supervision of the county administrator and the county council. We can go 2 slides, Madam Clerk, please. And so now we're at the categorized needs list. So let me pause for a second and just remind everyone what this is and why it is. So when we originally received the report from Stantec, which was commissioned by the County Council, which was intended to take an inventory of the needs around the community with input from the public, from the affected municipalities, from other affected stakeholders. That came to us in the form of the Stantec Transportation Needs List. It came to us before any of the categories or any of these concepts had ever really been conceived of. In the course of working with TPAC, TPAC made a really good recommendation, and that is, why don't we take the needs list from Stantec and let's get it organized by the way that we're talking about the penny, which is, let's get it organized by what is a community investment project, what's a county advancement project, and where does the comment fall in this. And so the categorized needs list, which is part of what you have, it shows simply the Stantec needs list put into categories. And you may say, well, how do we know what a county advancement versus a community investment project is? We worked with Mr. Maloney's office. He set out some parameters about the size and scope and the number of vehicles and the number of folks affected to sort of make those larger projects county advancement projects. And most other projects that are not related to the comment fall into the community investment category. And that's really critical because we want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. We're speaking not only the language that Stantec originally presented to us, but then the language that's been adopted by TPAC, by this committee, and the county council. Those categories live in these principles. They're also in the ordinance that ultimately would be approved by county council. So the categorized needs list is important. If you could go to the next slide, and I'm not going to go through every line, I just want to remind you all that when you take the Stantec needs list and you put it together by category and you add up all the costs, which are both inflation adjusted and enhanced for soft costs, so each hard cost project has soft costs associated with it, you end up with about 2.7 billion, not inflation adjusted, I just want to stress that, 2.7 billion of community investment needs, and you end up with about 1.4 billion of county advancement needs. And so these are the very same numbers we showed the committee on the 18th. These are the very same numbers we showed the county council at the work session on the 25th. Again, this is by way of review. If we could go one more slide. I want to reiterate that—
Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, would
Yes.
you repeat that number again for county investment?
The community investment number, which is a combination of two things. It's the Stantec needs list. Then all of those Stantec needs have been shifted into the correct project category. And to the extent they were not inclusive of soft costs, they're all inclusive of soft costs. So the community investment number is 2.7 billion, and the county advancement number is 1.4 billion.
Thank you.
If we could go 2 slides, Madam Clerk. Thank you. The reason I want to go 2 slides is because we've discussed the fact that the TPAC identified, and in this committee also discussed, as well as did the county council at the work session, that the amount of needs falling into the community investment category is higher than what we initially anticipated. You may recall that when we began talking about how we divide the penny, there was a presumption, and I think probably at the time it was the right presumption, that countywide projects in the county advancement category would need more. And so what you see on the screen is the second reading penny allocation. In other words, this was in the ordinance at second reading, and it called for 30% of the penny to go to community investment related projects, 50% to go to county advancement, and 20% to go to the comment. Likely, based upon the conversations of TPAC and this committee, there needs to be further conversation about whether or not that needs to be changed. And so now if we go to the next slide. So you'll see the slide's called How to Divide the 80%. The 80% is currently what is categorized as a non-comment expenditure. Currently, the comment has 20% assigned to it. So the other 80%, okay, again, as I said before, the second reading allocation is effectively 30 to the community projects and 50 to the overall county projects. When you look at the division shown by the actual needs list, it shakes out to 52% of the needs are actually in the community investment projects, and 28% of the needs are in the county advancement. And so the recommendation that came from TPAC and actually came out of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee to the County Council at its June 25th work session was to shift the percentages so that 50% of the penny would go to the community-related projects, community investment projects, and 30% would go to county advancement projects. That's still where we are today. It's here to the extent there needs to be any further conversation so that the committee is in a position to make a recommendation to full council. If we can go one more slide and then we'll sort of wrap this up. If this committee recommends to council the new allocation, if you will, shifting the 50% from county advancement to community investment, then this, what's on the screen, this is what the ordinance would look like, and this is what the question would look like. It would show 50% to community investment, 30% to county advancement, and 20% to the comment. I've been asked a couple of times, well, when is this final? It's final when the county council gives third reading to the ordinance, so there's still plenty of time to have conversations about this, which is obviously what we're doing today. We could go one more slide, please. This is a slide that came out of a conversation with the TPAC as well, and the question was, of the total amount of needs that we have in the community investment and county advancement categories, inflation adjusted. Now, that inflation adjusted number moves all over the place. But we believe if you take the $4.1 billion that I referenced to you earlier and you inflation adjusted that number, right? Everything gets more expensive. We all know that. So labor, materials, everything. We think that 4.1 could grow to 8 billion, maybe more, but 8 billion is our inflation adjusted number. Likewise, we asked the comment to do the same thing. The comment initially made a request to us and we said, can you give us the inflation adjusted version of that? I see Mr. Pearl is here today, but the inflation adjusted version of the comment's request is 1.1 billion. If we take what we expect to collect in the penny, which is about $4.5 billion. 4.5 billion. Don't hold me to that. It might be more, it might be less, but that's our working number, 4.5 billion. If 80% of 4.5 billion goes to community investment and county advancement projects, and what you see is that the current penny allocation would generate $3.6 billion for those projects, which means that roughly 4.4 billion won't get done. And so just by percentage, that means roughly 45% of the projects that have been identified as community investment or county advancement could potentially be addressed by the penny. Similarly, not all the comment projects would get done either. And right now, if things stay as they are, we would be at about an 82% funding percentage for the comment projects, assuming the comment gets 20% of 4.5 billion or roughly $900 million. And go one more slide, please. From our perspective, we're now kind of coming into the middle portion of now this 16th public meeting or 17th public meeting, and glad to answer questions and or help facilitate conversation so that this committee is comfortable making recommendations to the full county council.
Before, I guess, we entertain any questions from the body or comments from the body, I want to recognize our vice chair, Vice Chair Derek Pugh. Good to see you, Mr. Vice Chair. Madam Clerk, is anyone else from the body that is on virtually in attendance? Okay. All right. You recognize Ms. McBride.
Mr. Jones, thank you for the overview, and particularly for emphasizing the inflation, which caused problems last time. And I don't want to go into all the details of the inflation, but in doing the inflation, was there a time period for 3 years inflation, 4 or 5? Was that a part of the analysis?
Yes, ma'am. So what we did is we sort of did a straight line. So in other words, and we as Stantec and Ms. Thomas and a lot of folks looked at this, but we looked at if the costs basically continue to go up over the duration of the penny, over 25 years, where would we be? Now, I will tell you that if you just say, at 4.1 billion today, if I increase that by 3 or 4% for the next 25 years, it'll be more than 8 billion. So why did we pick 8 billion? Well, because some of the projects are getting done. In other words, we're not waiting 25 years to do something. We're going to be working on them along and along and along. And hopefully, the quicker we get them done, the less impact inflation will have on us. So as a result, we sort of back down from the projection if you just applied 3% for the next 25 years and landed at around $8 billion. It is an educated guess. Yes, ma'am.
A follow-up with Mr. Livingston's question about unfunded projects. And I believe you said that the projects will be selected based on priority. In selecting the priority, what system was used for, or what system is used for the unfunded projects?
That's a great question, and I think it's important that we reiterate a couple of things. First, maybe mentally think about it this way. We have unfunded but viable. In other words, there's nothing else that's going on that would cause a project not to get done. So unfunded but viable, 2012. And then we have the new needs that have been identified, the current needs, this big list we've been talking about. If the penny passes, what your principles say is unfunded first. They get done first. Now, in what priority do they get done? There's two ways that that'll be dealt with. First, the county council has several ordinances already on the books that deal with how to prioritize resurfacing and dirt road paving. So if it's something that falls within the county's current ordinance, it'll be prioritized that way. If it doesn't fall, for whatever reason, within the county's current ordinance, then your scoring system here for all the new needs, which I might add tilts heavily towards safety, then the scoring system would be applied to the project.
As much as I trust Mr. Maloney with his prioritizing, I'm not too sure about the other system, because we're using safety, but I guess I can get some more details on that at a later time, because I don't want to prolong, Mr. Chair.
Ms. McBride, now is the time to have that conversation. So if you got questions or any additional inquiries, please proceed.
Okay, with the emerging needs. So for clarification again, how are we prioritizing those emerging needs?
It'll be, yes, ma'am.
You know, I'm interested in evaluations and all
Yes,
that
ma'am.
stuff.
Well, the principles should be your friend then. So the emerging needs. So one of the things, we're not going to have a whole nother system for emerging needs. So in other words, the principles that have been identified by county council and approved by TPAC and this committee, which include safety, overall impact, economic development, improving certain conditions if there's just a rundown. So the emerging needs are thought to go through the exact same scoring system. However, it's important, let's say that, you know, we end up with a list of 20 emerging needs. All of those needs may not actually move forward at the same pace. Some of those may be more acute needs. And so the idea is that those emerging needs would be brought by the Transportation Department through TPAC for some analysis, to this committee for some analysis, then recommendation to full council. So not only will you all get to see what the emerging needs are, you'll get to see how they're prioritized. And if for some reason there's a disagreement about how the priority has gone, the ultimate decision maker here about what emerging need gets addressed is council.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any questions, comments? Thoughts? You recognize Mr. Lewis.
I'm a little concerned about the perception of the needs list. Because it's not designed to address every transportation need in the entire county. And I think when people look at the list and they're going to assume that this is the list and these are all the needs we're going to meet in the county. I mean, it's like with the last penny. I mean, you know, the needs that were identified, you know, all about a third of the resources were there for it. And that's going to be similar to this particular penny too. So we got to figure out a way to get the public to understand that by passing this penny, we don't mean everything on this needs list going to get done. So I think it'll be real important for us to figure out and explain to folks what would happen is the same thing. Oh, it was on. That's one big concern. I want us to try to figure out a way to address as we move forward.
Comments? Ms. Newton, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Ms. McBride's comments about emerging needs, and I apologize, I apologize if I've missed this because there have been many documents that we've received at different times. Is there a place where we currently outline the amount of funds that we are reserving for those emerging needs that you can point me to just so I can read it right now?
I can. In the actual at the end of the principles, there's an Exhibit C. It says project categories, major projects. Under each of the project categories, the last section is emerging needs under that particular section. So for instance, under the emerging community investment needs, right now, $100 million is being set aside. That's subject to change, and that's subject to input from this council. Under county advancement, the emerging needs is now listed at $250 million. There are no emerging needs listed under the comment-related projects because that's not the way the comment-related projects were presented. In other words, to the extent the comment board down the road determines that there are additional needs that need to be addressed, the description of what they can do with their funds is intended to be broad enough to give them that flexibility.
Okay, and I see that, and thank you for answering my question.
Questions, buddy? Oh, I guess it's a question or more so an invitation to sort of line the discussion here, amongst, the body. And I guess my question, and it's not so much for you, Mr. Jones, but it's more so, again, just for the body, but just any thoughts on 3 categories for the proposed penny vis-a-vis 2 categories. I think right now it is county advancement, community investment, and comment enhancement. And so I'm thinking, and maybe this is somewhat political, but I've always been taught if you want people to do something for you, you make it easier for them to do it. And so I'm thinking in terms of what the penny would look like on the ballot for residents. And would it be more palatable, for residents if they saw 2 categories as opposed to, having community investment and county advancement, perhaps just community investment and comment enhancement. From what I've heard, in these conversations about community investment rather than county advancements, that there is a lot of overlap. But I also heard you say this afternoon, Mr. Jones, that there has been, I guess, this demarcation that has been made by staff and your team and the county attorney's office. So we do know that there are some distinctions between the 2, but nevertheless, there's still some overlap. Not sure if residents will make that distinction. So I would just like to hear input from the body as far as what you all think, in terms of 3 categories versus 2 categories in the final ordinance. And if we have thoughts on that, I think now's the time to have it. Our discussion, I would rather not wait until we get before the full body, what is up for a vote, to try to sort that out. So any thoughts or, input, you recognize Mr. Branham. And also, Mr. Branham, before you go, I just want to recognize Councilwoman Barron, who's present with us this afternoon. Good to see you, Ms. Barron.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Branham.
Yeah, I can see where that suggestion would come from for sure, just for simplicity's sake. And this is just, again, first impression thoughts, but I do like the idea of knowing that some of those larger impact projects that are currently under that county advancement category would be secured, and that there would be some pot of money guaranteed to go towards those projects that are impacting at a greater scale. But yeah, again, I could see the wisdom in going to 2 category. And while I'm at it, I did want to say as well, I was the movement at the second reading to have the allocation set at the 50-30-20, with 50 towards the county advancement. But in light of the additional information, kind of refining categories and kind of just again resetting where different items fall under, I'm very much open to reviewing those allocations as to that 80% that we're talking about, the non-comment allocation. Thank you.
Random, Ms. McBride, and then Mr. Livingston.
If we do 2 categories, then you're saying that we would combine the community and county just in terms for the category's sake, but we would already have the principles outlined in terms of where this funding would go. So it's not going to actually impact the funding decisions.
Absolutely, Ms. McBride. It doesn't change anything fundamentally. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm for one over the other.
Right,
I just want us to have a conversation about what we think would make it easier for voters when they go to the polls and assuming it passes and it gets on the ballot, what would make it easier for them in terms of voting in favor of it.
And
But
just
you have the
thinking
floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. From the top of my head, not really analyzing it a lot. It would simplify the voting process. But from past experience, and I'm so happy that the county has decided to put the amount of funding in the community impact, the community advancement. I think you even did that without my vote. So, so I'm really happy about that part of it. So in the past, some of the communities felt that they were not receiving the funding. And to put that out shows that, okay, we're thinking not only about the county as a whole, but we're going to look at each community and ensure that your community also is a part of this process. So if we combine this, do we leave that out? I know it's not out by principle, but I'm saying it's not out where they can see it at the voting polls. That's my only concern. Will that impact that?
Sure. Mr. Livingston?
Now, I'll just agree that it would simplify things, but I think more, if you combine them, but I think more important to me is I think it gives council a whole lot more flexibility. As we go through the process of trying to get things done, you can have a whole lot more flexibility if you're not tied down to specific categories, and you can get just that broad area. So I think it'd be a whole lot better and to just do that one broad category.
Ms. McBride, and
Yeah,
then
just a
Mr.
follow-up.
Pugh. Sure.
But that's not changing the categories, combine them. I just wanted to make sure that, Mr. Livingston, so we're not going to change the categories when we combine them, and we're not going to change what's going to be funded from it. Okay.
Mr. Pugh?
Thank you, Chairman Walker. I do think it'll be simpler for voters when they go to the voting booth in November. And if I'm hearing everything the correct way, that means we're going to go 80-20?
Possibly. Nothing's been settled yet, but possibly.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right. Ms. Newton?
Thank you, and I'm trying to process the combining, not combining, and make sure I'm understanding. So if I could use different language just to make sure I understand the intent of the question. So first, I do agree with the principle that making things easier to understand for everybody is always better. In that sense, the topic that we're discussing right now is presenting the penny on the referendum in terms of this is the amount that goes to the COMET and this is the amount that goes to other projects that are not COMET. Whatever we call it, whatever it consists of, that we're just clearly showing there's a certain amount of transportation projects and then there's a certain amount of COMET, and we're just separating them that way. So I have a follow-up question if I'm tracking so far. Is that generally it? Okay, and so then with that in mind, if we were to present it to the voters, this is the COMET piece and this is the transportation piece, just to be clear, that doesn't negate any of the other categories that we do. We're just, for purpose of understanding, lumping those two together on the referendum so voters clearly know.
That's correct.
If that is the case, then that makes a lot of sense to me, and I appreciate the suggestion and would support it at the appropriate time, which is not now for me.
Jackie?
Thank
And then
you.
Ms. Baird.
Just for additional clarification around the conversation. So if you look at our packet on exhibit, we have a breakdown for the community investment and the county advancement projects with, percentages and dollar amounts tied to them. And so is the suggestion that we say one category 80%, but we're still keeping everything else the same with the dollar amounts tied to them?
Correct. That's my understanding, unless someone were to make a motion for, say, a higher percentage for the COMET or what have you. But it's
But I guess I'm just focusing on projects related to the community and then county. So when you talk about the true transportation projects, for example, when you look at the breakup now, you have categories that fall under community investment, and there's a set percentage tied to that. So those projects, whether it's pedestrian safety, traffic safety, those road repaving are in a certain 50% amount. So when you combine the two, then I guess my question becomes, how then are you looking at funding them? Does that make sense? Because now all of these are placed in the same category, whereas before we knew, okay, 30% is going to county advancement projects, and we know that's that, but we can say for sure to the community, you're gonna get 50% of this. So we knew that more projects would get done that fell under community investment. If you lump the two, my question then becomes, how then do you say, or how do you ensure that more community projects, or at least the ones that we've labeled community projects, actually get done?
Mr. Chair.
That would be a question for whoever proposed the idea.
Mr. Wright, you recognize?
I was just going to say that what you could do, if that is something you want to do, is you can keep it exactly the same. Instead of being two separate categories, it'll be two major subcategories of an umbrella category. So you have an umbrella category, but you have the two major subcategories under that. So nothing else would actually change. It's just that on the ballot, instead of having the three separate things, you'd have two.
Thank you. I definitely want to make sure we keep that clarification, because to me, that would be most important, to make sure that we can ensure that the work is done, that we've heard the feedback, that the projects that are deemed community investment, that they don't get lost when we combine. So if it's making them subcategories, I think that still sticks to what we have been reviewing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Manchin. Ms. Barron and then Ms. McBride.
So, part of what I was going to say, I think the county attorney somewhat addressed, because it does seem like this is merely packaging this, but I think it's important how we package it. You know, we're definitely packaging it one way to take it to the voters, but internally, that's where the packaging is more important, because we need to know that the county investment projects are going to stay true to the county investment projects. And the advancement projects are going to stay true to the advancement project. Because I think that that's where TPAC and this body has done a lot of work to, to make sure that we have categorized things and prioritized things. And while we want this to be palatable and in a way that the voters understand what it is we're doing, once it, if it passes, then the internal process is where I get a little nervous. Because I think that if with the subcategories, it makes sense to have these subcategories so that the process stays true. But I can just see it if we just, we're saying that nothing is changing, but I don't know that, once the ball gets rolling, without proper tracking mechanisms and still having this list like what's in front of us right now, Exhibit C, without having those things still in place so that there is, I guess just a checks and balance for the staff and anyone else who has oversight on it. So that's just my thought on it. I think, anything that we can do to make for ease for residents to understand what it is we're doing or not doing is important. But I do think that it's been, I'm not on this committee, but I've been a part of this process with you. And so I think that we've put a lot of work here, and I don't want it to go erased or even, I don't think it would be done intentionally, but, let's just say true to the process. Package it however we want to package it, but make sure that those categories remain solid. Thank you.
Ms. Fair. Ms. McBride?
Initially, when I asked my question, and I thought it was a given that those categories would remain the same, but thank you for clarifying it. Because I couldn't support it if we couldn't keep those categories the same. And if the subcategories would address that, then I think that I could work with that, live with that. But also, I don't know whether, Mr. Chair, whether our council or Mr. Jones, whoever can answer this. In the referendum, I think before, there was a reference in terms of the various policy decisions that were made regarding funding and what was funded. Will that be the same this time, or is that different? Because I was assuming that the reference, for lack of a better term, the reference that would be used in the referendum would have clarified that 50%, 30% goes here, 50% goes here, 20% goes there. And so that's why I assume that that would be a part of the big picture and a part of the referendum. Can you help me?
Yes, ma'am.
You
So
recognize, Mr. Chair.
you're exactly right. So right now, and I think you all received the latest ordinance it's before today, but right now, if you look at it, the ballot question, which is attached to the ordinance, does exactly what you're saying. It says, but it does it in 3 categories. So if it's the will of the body to take it to 2, that's what we're here to work for you. So you tell us how you'd like to do it. It's perfectly fine. But right now it says this percentage goes to this category and that equals roughly this amount of money. And it describes what the category is. And so those 3 categories and the percentages and the dollars are currently in the ballot question. And to the extent there's a recommendation to take it from 3 to 2, then we would just make the corresponding changes to the ballot question.
Right, so it would still be within the body. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. Any additional questions? Recognize Mr. Racy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know we've been talking about ways to make particularly the ballot question a little easier and simpler. And I know we've kind of gotten very settled, if you will, on this sort of 80-20 kind of split. I do believe that I would be remiss if I did not kind of bring up that the 20% allocated to the comment would equal to about $900 million. And thank you. And so we list out the things that the comment would seek to do with those monies, and that there's really, if we are really looking to make some expansions and some service enhancements, that number would need to look just slightly higher, perhaps at a 22%, or which would get us a true enhancement in parts of the county like Lower Richland and like moving out to Blythewood, and also allow for some frequency enhancements to allow for the buses to come more like every 15-20 minutes rather than every half hour, which would be a great service to a lot of the people who stand outside and wait for the bus. So I did want to lift that up and wanted to hear if there was any conversation or openness to that from my colleagues around perhaps looking at a different number that would allow the comment to truly do the kinds of enhancements that we would seek for the citizens of Richland County.
Any comments or any additional inquiries in response to Mr. Racio's ask?
Yeah.
You recognize Mr. Livingston, and then Ms. Mankey.
Just from a general perspective, I just think when we look at long-term issues like this, we need to look at it with a vision. And what I mean by that is look at the evidence and the trends. And I think that is what was done with the last penny, because, we looked at the Northeast, look at the growth and so forth. So that's why you had Clemson Road and Polo Road and Blythe Road and Kelly, all those roads in the project. Because we saw the growth and going there, and we projecting that. Same old thing with the Southeast. That's why we did Leesburg Road and Sharp Road and Pavia and so forth. It was the vision plan for the future. I say that to say because right now what I see is part of our vision now has to be, I think, is the comment. And what I mean by that is, right now, what I see happening in our county is a significant increase in density, all over the place. I see significant more students, whether it's Benedict, USC, Midlands Tech, Columbia College, or whatever. We're going to see a whole lot more visitors. We're going to have one of the finest zoos in the country. They'll be visiting. And we're going to need a significant greater amount of connectivity. And I see a greater need for the comment because of that. If we're going to look out for that particular vision and make that work for us. So I do agree. I strongly think we ought to increase the percentage for the comment. I have not spoken with anybody with the comment, or Ms. Teresa or anybody else, but just my reflecting back on what I think the vision ought to be for this penny. That's a big part of my reflection in terms of the vision for this penny, to look at how do we make sure we take advantage of the comment, because we're going to need that in our future. Let's talk about 10, 15, 20 years from now, not what's going to happen tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Anki, you recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reishi, for bringing that up, because I believe you brought it up a little bit during the work session, but I'm glad to bring it up again so we can talk about it as we get closer to our public hearing and final third reading. I think the piece that I continuously think about and look at is a slide that Mr. Jones shared related to project funding percentage, and just looking at the breakdown of what it looks like with inflation and the county advancement, community investment category, and the comment category. And at the end of that table, where we have that yellow highlighted column that talks about the funding percentage and shows that, okay, based upon where the current ordinance is now, that our transportation projects, the community investment and county advancement, that only 45% would actually get done in the list, whereas the comment has a 82% need. And I think right there, that shows you that there is a larger investment in the comment being able to meet its needs based upon how the percentage is broken up now in the ordinance for this new penny. And I also think about a statement that Mr. Livingston made earlier, in that the transportation penny is not meant to meet every project or every need. And I think that holds true for the comment as well. This penny is not going to solve every problem, and nor is it going to 100% meet the transportation needs or the comment's needs. And we all know that, I think, going in. And so I think that's where we kind of have to be realistic when we talk about explaining it to voters. Realistically, to voters, it won't meet all the transportation needs and it won't meet all the comments needs, but we're going to get it as close to possible to plan for the growth that we have. And I think we've done a good job with this. I think it's also looking at where the last penny, when we had in 2012, and now, and the growth that has come, and the more people that come here, we know the growth is here and it's going to keep coming. And I know that a lot, especially in the Northeast, somebody who lives in the Northeast, we see the housing developments that are coming and more that are continuing to come. And we do have a lot of needs for roads, road widening, for sidewalks, for folks to be able to get out of their neighborhoods and get to the interstate. And so I do look at it as, even if it is an additional 2 or 3%, that takes away from additional sidewalks, that takes away from additional dirt road repaving in some of these neighborhoods that really need it. Because these percentages, we're not talking about thousands, you're talking about millions of dollars when you move percentages. That could easily be 4 or 5 additional new sidewalks or roads, paved projects in a community. And so I think as we look to put this out to voters and really saying to the voters that this is a penny that is going to help fund the roads and your needs, I think we need to show them that. And so I definitely understand where you are in the comments needs, but I think I'm also understanding that this penny is not going to solve everybody's needs, and we all have to work together and be team players and do what we can right now to make sure we are trying to meet the needs of all.
Well, at her hand, but let me go, Aaron, and then come back to you, Mr. Racio.
And I'll be brief. Oh, I guess if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to ask Ms. Teresa a question. So your question or your request was to increase the comments percentage from 20% to 22%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so in the scheme of things, you know, when you're talking about, you know, $5 and $10, that's not a big deal. But when you start talking about millions and billions, you know, it does add up tremendously. But I hear what Mr. Livingston is saying. I also hear what Ms. Mackey is saying. And I think somewhere along the line, we do have to make a decision, but also make a decision that lines up with what we've been saying. Like, we want this to be the capital county, and we want to position ourselves as such. And when I travel, I will tell you, I look forward to parking my automobile or not having an automobile so that I can jump on public transportation. I would not do that here in Richland County. And I'll just be frank, I wouldn't. And I think that part of our structure is not there. It's not there at this point, and it would take some time for us to get there. But, you know, in the scheme of things, I was really bent on just let's leave in these percentages the way that they are. But if we're talking about packaging them differently, we're talking about 2% versus, I think initially you had 40% or 30%. I think you're a smart person and know how to negotiate. But you know, for me, 2%, I can live with a lot more so than I could the 20 and 10 that came before. And so I say all that to say that as we position ourselves to align with our strategic plan, to align with all the things that we want to do, we definitely want to invest in those things that are important to us. And I think that if this council thinks that the common is important, then we should, you know, an additional 2%. It's not going to make or break the bank one way or the other. Will we not get some things? Sure. Will the comments still not going to get some things? Yeah. So I do think that. Thank you.
Before I come to you, go to Ms. Racio.
Thank you. So just wanted to say that the comment was asked to sort of explain the 82%. Again, if folks maybe didn't hear the other meeting or maybe weren't here, the comment was asked to present a number that represented the portion of the budget that they needed that it would need from the penny in order to maintain current service and do some enhancements, which would include added service to Lower Richland, particularly some to Blythewood, and then the increased service so that folks did not have to wait so long for a bus. And so the 900 million would, which would represent 20% of the penny, and 82% of would also represent 82% of that penny ask, right? So 100% of the penny ask would be about 960 million, I believe. So, okay, let me back up. I think I just confused everybody, maybe including myself. Okay, so the comment was asked to present a number which would represent the current service, maintaining current service, and then add some enhancements. What the comment did ask for was, with every enhancement that would be in the vision of the comment, would represent about 25% of the penny total. So I'll pause there, and that would have been about 1.1 billion. With some service enhancements, meaning the expansion in Lower Richland and the increased frequency, that would represent about 22.5% of the penny, which would equal about $960 million. I'm going to pause.
If
Okay.
I may,
Uh-huh.
Ms. Teresa, let me chime in as well, because I've
Thank you.
had some conversations also. And I'll come to you, Mr. Pugh. So, but just to, provide, some clarity or added context. Initially, when the comment submitted their numbers, I believe 960 million was the initial number, and that represented funding the Comet's needs and the enhancements and so on, and as well as implementing the Comet's vision over a period of 22 years. And at that time, we were mulling a 22-year penny as opposed to a 25-year penny. But then there were subsequent conversations had once it became clear that council was moving more towards a 25-year penny. And so over the course of 25 years, the Comet said, well, it would take 1.1 billion to fund its needs, in addition to providing enhancements as well as implementing the Comet's vision, over that 25-year period. So that would describe sort of the disparity of the difference in numbers, 22 years versus 25 years. And so 25%, I believe, of a 22-year penny would have been the 960 million, and 25% of a 25-year penny represents the 1.1 billion. Does that make sense for the rest of the body? Okay, all right. Mr. Racio,
Okay,
continue.
thank you. And then just to address the 82% of the, so the chart that Ms. Mackey, Chair Mackey was referring to, which is up on our screens now, it looks like that is funding 82% of the Comet budget, but it's really just 82% of the penny ask. And so that does not represent 82% of the total Comet budget. So I just want everybody to be super, super clear on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a few questions and a statement. The first is a statement. I do support public transportation in the Comet. And without the Comet, our capital city and Richland County would not operate the way it needs to operate. So I'm in full support of the Comet. I feel like, and this is my personal opinion, I feel like that we've been receiving information about what the Comet needs in bits and pieces. So it doesn't give us an opportunity to make a solid decision. My question is, how much is 2%, and where will we move the 2% from when it comes to the categories?
Racio.
Mr. Chair,
All right, Mr. Livingston. Mr. Livingston. Right.
Maybe,
This is not the county attorney.
Say something, man.
Mr. Wright, then Mr. Racio, then Mr. Livingston.
can I ask that we go into executive session regarding the discussion of the funding?
Any motion?
so moved.
Second.
Properly second. Any discussion?
Yes.
All right, you recognize Ms. Mackey?
I do want it to show that it is 2:30. This meeting was scheduled for an hour. We do have a work session scheduled after this. I'm fine to go into executive session, but I do want to make note of the time and the remaining meetings on our calendar.
Duly noted. Discussion. Okay, Madam Clerk?
McBride? Yes. Livingston?
Yes.
Walker?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
Second?
Move to properly second. Any discussion?
Oh, I'm not on
I'm
this.
sorry.
I can't-
I need a
I can't.
second. No, I need a motion to come out of executive session.
So move.
All right, I need a second. Ms.
Second.
McBride, all right, Ms. Mackey gave me a second. Any discussion? There being none. Madam Clerk?
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
On the record reflect, we went into executive session regarding items 4A and B, and no action was taken. We just received legal advice. All right.
Mr. Chair,
You're recognized, Ms. Mackey.
thank you. I'd like to make a motion to accept TPAC's recommendation related to the community investment projects and the county advancement projects at their percentages presented.
Second.
You're not on this committee, sir.
Don't ask me to leave.
Everybody not on the
Is
committee,
there a
Lord.
second? Is there a second? All right, motion dies for lack of a second.
Yep.
You recognize Mr. Livingston?
I'd like to move that we fund the comment at 22% of the estimated 4.5 billion, and we fund the other two at the balance of the 78. I'm open for any suggestions about how that split, how we want to make that split based on what our percentage.
Second.
Properly second. Discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Mackey?
can we please get clarification before we take a vote on what the percentages are?
22%, right now, it's just 22% for comment.
Well, Mr. Livingston, would you be willing to accept a friendly amendment that county advancement at, let me see, county advancement at 30% and community investment at 48%?
Yes. That would be the motion. 2%.
Area motion that needs to be amendment rather, that requires a second.
I
Mr.
second.
Wright. It's been moved to properly second. Any discussion? All right. Aaron, you ready?
Thank you. So I just want to ask my question now, so I'll be clear when this goes to full council, and that is, we're only talking about changing these percentages. We're not talking about the whole package deal that we talked about earlier with having two categories versus.
Possibly as of right now, the vote is just for the percentages.
My motion is
but-
just a percentage, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank.
Yeah, okay. Madam Clerk?
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey. Motion approved.
Additional business from this body, I believe Ms. Barron asked a question about as far as the manner in which this would be packaged. That could be taken up now, or that could be presented, but we can take it up before full council. But anything on that front? All right. Next item on the agenda is item 5, adjournment. Entertain a motion.
So move.
Second. Move to properly second. That's non-debatable. Madam Clerk?
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
We are adjourned.